Let's get into it. Coach Colin here. Guys, we are talking about the Book of Enoch. I was surprised how much this guest on Joe Rogan's show knew about the Book of Enoch. Now, I'm going to, you think maybe she's just like a pretty face, but as she gets into this whole podcast, if you haven't watched it, well versed in the Book of Enoch and well versed in many other things as well. But I'm going to take you through the clips where she talks about the Book of Enoch and they kind of go back and forth on that. Then I'm going to show you Wes Huff talking about why the Book of Enoch is like it's like pseudo-scripture. And then I'm going to take you to another scholar who talks about it the same type of way, right? Those are the people who are kind of debunking. Then I'm going to show you some people who actually are not debunking. They're embracing it, and they think that it is actually a major scripture that should be included in the Bible. And they have some great arguments towards that as well. And then I'm actually going to show you a brief clip from a documentary that actually breaks down what was going on in the Book of Enoch. It is wild stuff. Get your tinfoil Speedos on because, and I know I mention them a lot, but in today's world, you kind of have to. Demons. It seems like it's very connected to demons. And at the very end, I got to remind myself, I'm going to mention to you why the Book of Enoch is something of a warning towards what we see today in Hollywood. That's just me. That's a real tinfoil Speedo moment. But let's start off with this first. Let's go.
Rolled out in a certain aspect. And, when you have certain books that are removed because they don't think that people should have access to this information or know it, why remove a book from a Bible, right?
Did Wes Huff, did he touch on that? Did he talk about that? Are there people that don't believe the Book of Enoch was really a part of the Bible?
I don't remember how he discussed the missing books.
Yeah,
I think we brought it up, but I don't remember how.
That's the guy to talk to.
Yeah. So what I gather,
that's the guy to talk to about. You know what I mean? Because you have to really understand the history of the Bible to be able to figure out what what's legitimate, what's not, why they put it into the New Testament. I had some very erroneous ideas about it until I talked to intelligent people that really know the history of it. And it's very strange stuff.
Well, so from what I gather, and by the way, I'm not a theologian in any capacity, but just from my personal opinion on this. So you have the Ethiopian Orthodox text, which has, I think, 88 books of the Bible in total. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox text, it's basically kind of like a mainline OG version of the Bible. And then sometime in the 4th century, there was actually a group that came together and they removed certain books. And the story goes that Revelations actually had replaced Enoch. And so it's interesting because when you're looking kind of full circle on, you hear the stuff that some of these people are talking about, and then you see and you read the Book of Enoch, which is a wild read, okay? And then you look at kind of what our modern day description is of what angels and entities are versus what Enoch was seeing and reporting in his language and ability at that time. I think that there's a lot that brings you to then ask the question, well, why would they remove this information? If it's truly, written in part of the oldest Bible in the world, why would they then take it out and water it down? And I'm not saying that you can't find God through the new Bible, right? Like everyone's on their own spiritual journey, and I think everyone can pray and you can access God. But I just find that very interesting. And so what I will say is that I like to have the whole kind of picture in front of me. And so I feel like to fully understand A through Z, you kind of have to be able to read it.
This is
So that was the first part that really got me thinking. And I was like, okay, this lady seems to know a lot. One thing I'll correct her on, I believe it's actually 81 books that the Ethiopian text has, but I'll look into it again when I'm actually going through a little bit of what I brought up on ChatGPT just to fact check some of what I was hearing. But she knows a lot, and she's right. I don't know if this book in particular, because there's a few that have been removed. I don't know if this book in particular should have been removed. Again, I will make my connections as to why it's so important for today. And again, put on your tinfoil Speedos. It's a deep one. Okay. The whole Hollywood Nephilim thing is a deep one. I'm going to go into it the best I can, but it really deserves its own episode. Let's go on to the next clip. Let's go. Oh, it's muted.
Spiritual grounding and even believing in most people today, I think when you talk about praying, even that whole concept is kind of just like, oh, they're just and I feel like that thing's kind of poo-pooed, but if you have like a grounding in that, and going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that that's not like, I don't think that society would do that. Granted, I'm not a scientist, I'm not running numbers, but just based on how we've kind of been evolving with access to information and kind of the questions, the discussions that have been happening, not just here, but I think internationally, I just think a lot's changing. Now, to say that we were, and I've heard some wild theories, like people think that, humanity was seeded by UFOs, and that's, I don't agree with that theory. I'm going to address it because
it's a fun one.
It's an interesting theory.
If you found out it was true, would you tell everybody?
I mean, I'd be transparent about it, but I just don't personally believe it.
But would you believe it if you found out that was the information
that
the government had?
Well, I'd put it out there because that's what I'm
right, but
supposed
what
to do.
would that do for your belief system?
That would suck.
But would it suck, really? Maybe that's what's confusing about the Bible. Maybe what's confusing is that it was an oral tradition for hundreds, if not 1,000 years before it was ever written down, right?
Well, I think that it depends on what book you're talking about, right? So,
but I
if you have
mean, the
books
Old
written by
Testament,
prophets.
if you go back to the oldest works of the Bible, weren't most of those stories handed down generation after generation and then eventually written down?
Written into text. Well, some of them are written by prophets, but I mean, Enoch is apparently supposed to predate even the time of Genesis and talk.
The nuttiest one is Ezekiel.
I'm telling you, Enoch is even crazier than Ezekiel.
Oh, I've read. I just don't. Did you find anything about whether or not Enoch is controversial?
You can look up the 4th century.
It was discluded as, I guess, since the 5th century. It wasn't in canon.
5th century.
And why did it get discluded?
It says the Jewish scribes or the priests the rabbis didn't believe it was canon.
Huh.
So it's regarded as scripture.
But what's interesting is that even if that's the case, though, you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that actually there's Ethiopian Jews, and that's considered the most pure form of the Bible. So you actually have a division of the Ethiopian Jewish class that actually recognized Enoch.
How weird is it that some rabbis 500 years ago made a call?
But that's what I'm saying is you can't though discredit it because
that's kind of weird.
But you can't discredit it because, again, when you have people removing books. I think, look, and I'm not telling people what to believe. I'm just saying you should take a look at it.
Oh, here it is. The main reason for the Jewish rejection of the book is that it's inconsistent with the teachings of the Torah. From the standpoint of rabbinic, how do you say that? Rabbinic Judaism. Sorry. The book is considered to be heretical. Another reason for the exclusion of the text might be the textual nature of several early sections of the book that make use of material from the Torah. For example, Enoch is a midrash of Deuteronomy 33. The context, particularly detailed descriptions of fallen angels, would also be reason for rejection from the Hebrew canon at this period, as is illustrated by the comments of Trypho the Jew when debating Justin Martyr on this subject. The utterances of God are holy, but your expositions are mere contrivances, as is plain from what has been explained by you, nay, even blasphemous, for you assert that angels sinned and revolted from God.
So it was
it seems like some people made a decision that something shouldn't be in there.
Yeah, but that's the thing is it's a disagreement in religion and perspective, but they should have still not removed it. And so it's interesting because then you have, the evolution of what the King James Bible is. We all know that story. He wanted to get remarried. They rewrote it. But you even have the Catholic Bible that has, it's what happened.
Right.
And you have the Catholic Bible that had books that were taken out, and then we have the King James. So I'm not saying that, if you read the King James, you're not getting, you don't have access to God. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that there's a bigger picture here that we need to discuss. And I think
there's always a problem when people get involved. And when people get involved in making decisions that this could be real and this could not be. The problem is, all these years later, you're dealing with the repercussions of that. Imagine a world in which if Enoch was left in the Bible and people were like, wait, what happened? Explain the nuttiness of the Book of Enoch to people.
Well, it's okay. So if you read it, it talks about the fall of angels, thus creating really the precursor of civilization that led to the first flood. I think that when you even go into potentially the technology that was given to mankind by these angels, it talks about the hidden beliefs and theories in astronomy, etc., metalworkings, all of it. But it really does explain, you were talking about earlier how you have a lot of these religions around the world that kind of say the same thing. This is kind of the OG text that leads to those stories that we're hearing from many religions around the world, to talk about angels mixing with mankind and then seeding a super essentially race of humans that essentially were responsible for basically damning mankind to the flood. I mean, you hear about stuff in Greek and Roman mythology, people who had these super crazy powers, and you talk about it out loud and it sounds crazy, but that's what the book says. And then the fact that it was taken out and then it's poo-pooed, yet you have one of the oldest religions in the world via the Ethiopians that actually still have it. You have, the Catholic Church that has books that are missing out of the King James Version. I'm just saying that, when you read it, you should read it and decide for yourself. Don't listen to what I'm saying, don't listen to what you're saying, but truly give it a chance and see what you have to say. And then, you're going back to this whole concept of if you have this information pertaining to UAPs, whatever they might be, the origins. I mean, if you have a understanding of what Enoch was talking about, kind of makes sense.
Well, I go back to my thoughts on all this stuff. It's like very few people could even read back then. Very few people could write, right? So you're not going to write. You're probably going to try to capture a truth. You're probably not writing necessarily to deceive people and make up a story. So the question is, with all this stuff, is like, what was the original truth that they were trying to write down, and how much of it is getting distorted by translations from ancient Hebrew to Latin to
or
Greek,
Aramaic to English.
like how much of it?
And there's this thing,
is it possible to even understand what they're saying without understanding the language? And my friend Rick Strassman, he's a very fascinating guy, but brilliant guy. One of the things that he did is he taught himself ancient Hebrew so he could read the Bible in ancient Hebrew. It took him 16 years.
Wow.
But he did it because, I want to know it in that language.
That's smart, because there's always an aspect of translation where you lose certain implications.
If you're playing the telephone game, you want to be second. You don't want to be 15th.
Exactly.
Right? And whoever was writing it down the earliest, that's probably, you're closer to their depictions of what that truth is than after King James starts fucking around with it. And all these
Want
other
a new
people,
wife, got to remove
all
certain
these
stuff.
new people start getting involved. But boy, when you go to the really old stuff, the really old stuff is very strange.
I'm telling you, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, I actually had a staffer that went to Ethiopia. She was on a church trip, and she actually brought me back a copy, and she's like, you can translate it via Google Translation, so kudos to modern day technology. So I have it in my office. And actually, when I did my swearing in, on the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible.
Wow.
It's cool. It's direct translation.
That's kind of crazy. It's I would wonder what the impact to all these religions would be if we had definitive proof that we're not alone. Like if there was an introduction,
That's kind of what the Book of Enoch does. Kind of shows that we're not alone. It's hard for even someone like Rogan to kind of accept that when you say we're not alone, it's actually via angels, fallen angels, demons, interdimensional types, because apparently there's many types. Won't get into it, but there's a bunch of different types as well. When you realize that's the not alone that we are currently in, then it kind of makes sense. And Book of Enoch was kind of touching on that. Now I'm going to play this first. Let's jump over here. I'm going to play this first. Then we're going to get into Wes Huff talking about what it actually is. I'll say he's in line with the debunking of it, right? But I will also say, as much as I like Wes Huff, the feeling I get, even from what Jerome was talking about just now, there is this element of this whole thing being pseudo, and we already know. So if you notice, Paulina Luna, she's talking about the Ethiopian people and how they keep this in their canon, which just means like they keep it as special. They keep it all wrapped up in their Bible, right? They didn't take out any books. Every time someone was taking out a book, the Ethiopians were like, nah, we're not taking that out of the book. So they kept it. It's so at the end of the day, and you'll see it as I play these clips, it's almost like, what it reminds me of? Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock first came out with what he thought about the younger Dryas impact and all of the things he was thinking about ancient societies and this and that. But when he first hit the scene, when he was on Joe Rogan at like episode 430 or something like that, he was seen, even still to this day, pseudo-scientist. Then they came out with racist. They just called him all these different names: crackpot, this, that, addict. They came up with all these names to discredit him. And then it turned out there were some of his assertions that actually came out to be right. it seems like the people who were gatekeeping Egypt, gatekeeping that field of study, it seems like the same thing is going on here. There's a little bit of gatekeeping. And, again, I like Wes Huff, but it just seems that same way of, we already know. We already know about all this, actually. We actually learned about all this. But then there's a culture that's way more ancient than anything Wes Huff studies, and, somehow he kind of just shoos that part away. It's very interesting. But let's listen to this story first, because it's wild.
It's all over the world. The story of Enoch takes place in ancient Mesopotamia, in the very early stages of humanity. God had sent these angels to keep watch over the earth, and they were called the Watchers. As humanity begins to expand, the daughters of men would start to multiply exponentially. They were truly gorgeous, and as these angels kept watching over earth, they start to get lost in the beauty of mortal women. The Book of Enoch explains that Samyaza, their leader, would gather up all of his angels to divulge this plan to go down to get for themselves wives. However, the consequence to illegally interacting with women would be absolutely detrimental, and they were very much aware of that fact. So Samyaza is worried. He was worried that for such a horrendous crime, he alone would suffer the punishment because he was the leader, you see. So in an effort to make himself feel a little bit less alone in this terrible endeavor, he actually binds himself and all of his angels together in this most mysterious oath. This oath would tie them together in both the blame and the consequence that was to come from this. Not much else is known about this strange oath, but with this in place, they were finally ready to embark on this most despicable mission. After the angels come down from heaven, the world plunges into absolute chaos. The Watchers had found their wives and had finally consummated their marriages, but the fun wouldn't last very long. Because it would be to their complete shock that the offspring of this unnatural relationship would be these abnormally large babies, half angel, half human hybrids who would end up growing to be 300 cubits tall. They were fierce, aggressive, and extremely strong beings, and they were exactly what the Bible is talking about in Genesis 6:4.
So that says Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4. Now, that's very interesting, because near the end of the episode, I actually have somebody who's talking with Michael Knowles, I believe, and they're having a conversation about this and why this is mentioned in Genesis. Okay, very, very, very good argument that this guy has. Let's keep going.
Now, why is this important? Because there is a whole backstory that we have completely forgotten about. And to be fair, Enoch is not biblically canon, but let me ask you this question. Where do demons come from? You see, the average Christian just thinks that anything demonic is just fallen angels, and that's because of Revelation 12:9, where it talks about this great dragon, Satan, who was the deceiver of the whole world. But it never specifically says that this is where demons come from. The truth is, the Bible doesn't really answer this question at all, and it's kind of strange, because 1/3 of Jesus' ministry was casting out demons. Well, if you go a little further in the Book of Enoch, now you start getting to the truly mind-bending stuff. These giants weren't created by God. Their souls weren't registered in heaven, so there would be no such thing as heaven for a giant. So in the end, when the Nephilim would die, their souls would be bound to earth to wander as evil spirits who oppress man. These Nephilim would ultimately become what we would know as demons today. Now, mind you, this was common knowledge 2,000 years ago. The Book of Enoch is, again, by no means canonical, but it was a verbal story that was passed down by generations. And people knew this story because obviously it answers a whole lot of questions. But this brings me back to my original inquiry. Once upon a time, God floods the entire earth. So what did men do to deserve such a detrimental fate? Don't get me wrong, sin was...
And this is where he starts talking about the Book of Giants, I believe. No, which is also something I need to look into a little more. Let me play a little bit more of this, in case he gives us some more context.
Already here on the earth, but after the fallen angels came down, sin became rampant everywhere. And it really starts with the wives of those angels. You see, in a relationship, people tend to talk. Over time, as these relationships continued, these angels would end up revealing these heavenly secrets. You see, after all, these were immortal beings who were there when the earth was created. These angels had known hidden knowledge about our reality that we can only describe as magic. So when this hidden knowledge was passed down to humanity, this would defile entire generations, separating them even more from God. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. It actually goes much, much deeper than this. I mean, God flooding the entire earth is such a personal and severe consequence. I never really understood why God would ever do such a thing, until one day I find out about this thing called the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Scholars at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem undertake.
So this is where he starts talking about the Book of Giants, and basically, I just wanted to play that one part, but yeah, I kind of want to leave that because I would love for you guys to actually go to his channel. I like this guy. I should subscribe right now. Boom. His name is, you can't see it here. It says Yo Mikes with a Z at the end instead of an S. Guy has a big channel, but I just found this so amazing. So I really like what he has to do, what he does. And yeah, let's move on. So I had this, but let's not even jump into that. Let's jump into Wes Huff. I don't want to get into scripture just because listen, you put on your tinfoil Speedo. We're gonna have fun. I might go back to the scripture a little bit if it's actually necessary, but that's not what I'm about. You know what I mean? I'm about wacky theories, and I have one. Okay. I just want to give you guys all the information before we get the tinfoil Speedos immersed in the deep. Okay. Because once we're in the deep, there's no coming out. Not with this one. This is a deep one. I might have to do an episode after this, but let's jump into Wes Huff, just talking about what the Book of Enoch is and, pretty much why it can't be trusted.
Enoch. What is First Enoch? Should it be in our Bibles, and why would you quote it? To start, though, let me say that what we now call the Book of Enoch is a compilation of a number of writings that most likely existed independently but eventually got pooled together in one document. Although it's much more ancient, the only existing full copy we have of First Enoch is a 15th century manuscript written in a version of Ethiopic. Fragments of different sections in Coptic, Greek, Latin, and Aramaic all exist, although only contain portions of the whole document. While the author of the book is attributed to Enoch, the Enoch of Genesis and the great-grandfather of Noah, the writing itself probably doesn't go older than the 400s BC, and some sections of it actually come after the time of Jesus. Now, it's true that during the Hellenistic period of Judaism, starting about 200 years before Jesus, many ancient biblical characters became the subject of extra-biblical and apocryphal literature. These documents are what we now refer to as the pseudepigrapha. Pseudo meaning false in Greek, and graphic meaning writing in Greek. The pseudepigrapha, therefore, is a collection of early Jewish literature that often have attributed authors that we know today were not the original authors. From what we do have, we can trace the earliest portions of what we call First Enoch to both Aramaic writing and style. Both the use of language and the language used represent the community of those who were coming back from Israel immediately after the Babylonian exile. It also contains themes from this time and advocates a solar calendar in opposition to the lunar calendar, which is what happened during the time due to the influence of Greek mathematics on timekeeping.
So, just with that little clip there, the main reason I wanted to play that clip is because, this is what made me feel right away. I'm like, oh,
writing in Greek.
They're treating this exactly the way that they treated Graham Hancock. Now, I'm not saying, just because they're doing this, that it means that it's all real and everything like that, but I just found it interesting. When I hear the word pseudo, when I hear someone say this is a pseudo-psychologist or a pseudo-scientist or pseudo-archaeologist, like they used to call Graham Hancock and still do, that nowadays gets my spidey senses up. That nowadays makes me go, okay, I'm going to go actually check this out. Because you're trying to tell me that it's false right away. But then you're also telling me, and again, this gets, really in the weeds, but it's also quoted in the Bible. So this false writing is quoted in the Bible, and it's made up from multiple writings from multiple people, which means that multiple groups of people who spoke Greek and ancient Arabic and Hebrew, they all had this story, and you eventually pieced it together through all their writings? Wouldn't that kind of give you the idea that this is like, if it's a known thing to that extent, that it might just be true and it might actually serve a purpose, maybe serve as a warning? I don't know. But again, we're in the debunking stage of this video, but he comes to this conclusion in another video. He's like, should we have the Book of Enoch in the Bible? And he goes, obviously no. And I don't know if that's so true. And when he says that we know, he's talking about his community. The same way when someone looks at Graham Hancock and says what he is doing is false, and it's dangerous and it's nonsense. Don't listen to Graham Hancock. We already know. That's the gatekeepers that those people are talking about in Graham Hancock's case. Now, it's just the same language that Wes Huff is using, but it makes me feel like, okay, you have a community of people who have agreed on something, and now anything that comes opposing that, you're kind of shielding yourself from and trying to shield your audience from as well. I don't know. Anyway, let's jump into this. This gentleman's also debunking a little bit. Let's hear it.
Together. There are obvious and abrupt seams between sections that are best explained by the theory that someone brought them all together into a compilation sometime in the past. First Enoch has 5 major sections and 2 appendices, which you can see on screen. The oldest sections of the text probably date back to the 4th or 3rd century BCE. However, the most complete manuscripts of the text date to the 15th or 16th centuries, written in the Ethiopic language. Ethiopic, also known as Ge'ez, is a Semitic language, a cousin of Hebrew, Arabic, and Amharic, one of the main spoken languages in Ethiopia today. Ethiopic is the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, kind of like how Latin was historically used in liturgies for Catholics, or the Coptic language for Coptic Orthodox Christians. So you can see that the Book of Enoch had a long journey from when it was first composed to when our most complete manuscripts were created. Enoch was probably originally written in Aramaic before being translated into Greek and then finally into Ethiopic. Big chunks of the Aramaic version of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at the site of Qumran. One Dead Sea Scroll fragment contains several sections of Enoch in one text, which shows that the different sections were already circulating as one compilation by the 1st century BCE. In all, 90 different manuscripts of 1st Enoch exist in some form or another. However, some of the manuscripts have big differences compared to earlier versions. This is why if you're going to read it for yourself, it's really important to find a scholarly translation that tries to account for all of the manuscript variations. I personally recommend the Hermeneia translation by George Nicholsberg and James Vanderkam. It's published by Fortress Press. This is not a advertisement, it's literally just the best version I could find when I was researching this episode. Okay, that's a quick overview of the text itself. It's comprised of several texts stitched into one. It was originally written in Aramaic, but its most complete manuscripts are written in Ethiopic. Parts of it probably date to the 4th century BCE, but it also has sections that date to a few centuries later. But what about the content? What does 1st Enoch actually say? Like I said, the best way I can describe the Book of Enoch is that it is spin-off literature. It takes 2 tiny, tantalizing snippets from Genesis and expands them into a whole book of fantastic visions and stories. We already saw the first blurb, a few short sentences that says, God took Enoch. The second blurb, which inspires the entire opening section of 1st Enoch, is an odd story from Genesis 6, 1 through 4, about divine beings having sex with humans. Genesis says that before Noah's flood, divine beings called B'nai Elohim, which literally translates to children of God, come down to earth to have sex with human women, who then give birth to beings called Nephilim. The text says these Nephilim were the mighty men of old, warriors of renown. That's it. Nothing else. No more mention of who these Nephilim were or their exploits. No backstory about these sons of God. And you know what that means? It's a story ready for a spin-off. Enoch.
See, and that's where I have to argue that. You're saying that because this is prime for a spin-off. Now, I think this is a very interesting take from Christian people, because they're kind of in the realm of like, hey, some of these books are just made up. It's like, okay, I don't know if you want to go down that road. There's a lot of people that think it's all made up. I don't know if you want to side with them. Okay. I'm just saying it's odd. But also, when he says this, you have to know who wrote Genesis. Moses wrote Genesis. And then the Book of Enoch was said to be written by his grandfather, I believe, maybe great-grandfather, something along that line. But, his ancestor. So the reason, and they're going to make this argument in this video here, the reason that he mentions it and doesn't touch on it anymore is not because it's ripe for a spin-off. Like as if these guys back in the day were like, we're going to make a spin-off episode. You heard what they said in Genesis, right? Well, I got this whole idea. Angels come down and make love to the hairiest women in the world. It's fantastic. God gets mad. And then we go to season 2. No. They're not doing that. Right? At least I think. I don't know. But the reason that he does that is because it should be known already. If your grandfather told you a story and everybody knew about the story, you'd kind of mention it, but you wouldn't be like, do I have to break this down for anybody? Like if I say Joe Rogan talks about aliens all the time, do I have to show you every episode? Or are you going to be like, yeah, it's Joe Rogan. We all know the story. So I can just say, Joe Rogan's on another AI rant or on another alien rant. And because we're all a part of that same community, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't need to explain. I can just touch on it a little bit. That's exactly what happened here. And this is what they're arguing. So listen to this.
Oh, you've covered the bases there. So I would say the biblical view, and the only one that makes logical sense, is that the sons of God in Genesis 6 are an angelic faction. These are angels. These are not men. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were comely, and they decided to take wives from among the daughters of men, and they copulated with them, and the production of their union was giants, the Nephilim. See, that story that's found in Genesis 6, the writer of Genesis, when he's writing about the sons of God and this affair, and it's just a little snippet.
Yeah.
He does not elaborate.
Yeah.
He doesn't enlarge on this strange digression in the Genesis narrative.
Yeah.
He just mentions this bizarre thing.
I've started to read the Bible since I was a kid. I want to read the whole Bible, but I wouldn't finish it often. So I would start it again eventually. I'd say, okay, I'm going to start again. So I've read the book of Genesis like 1 billion times or something. And, every time you get to that and you say, wait, what? Hold on.
Exactly.
What was that part about? Hold on.
That's right. Back up. We need an elaboration on that. Well, the thing is that I'm totally persuaded that the writer of Genesis, as he's writing about the sons of God, this bizarre affair, he's not elaborating on it because the story is already well known.
Huh.
He's just assuming
right.
He's assuming that the audience already knows what he's talking about because this was one of the most monumental events that's ever happened.
Even you see this in the New Testament when specific people who were either alive at the time of the writing or who had been alive within living memory. They'll say, yeah, so-and-so, the daughter of so-and-so or the son of so-and-so, yeah, he saw this happen, and here's just a little bit, anyway, we all know, right?
Exactly.
You all know Johnny, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so you're saying that this is happening in the book of Genesis, like, yeah, of course, we all know
that the writer of Genesis is assuming that his audience is conversant with the larger narrative that expands on that, on the mention of the sons of God, on the writer of Genesis' allusion to that story. The audience already knew the whole story, so he didn't have to repeat it. There was no need to go back into all the details.
Now, 2 questions then. One, how does, at least the traditional Christian understanding of what an angel is, which I'm persuaded by, is that an angel is incorporeal. And one can go further, St. Thomas Aquinas describes angels as being, in a way, unique species that are, we have choirs of angels, we have a hierarchy of angels, but they don't communicate by speaking, for instance, because they don't have vocal cords and mouths. Now, angels do interact with human beings in mystical and interesting ways, but angels in themselves don't have bodies. Human beings do have bodies and rational souls. So we have intellect and we have flesh and we have will. And then there are the lower animals who have bodies and they have instinct and they have appetite, but they don't have intellect and will. So we're kind of this middle ground. We've got the reason, the intellect and the will, albeit greatly degraded, of an angel, but we got the body of an animal, and we're kind of this meeting point. So how does an incorporeal being create a child with a corporeal being, or do you have a different view of angels?
I think we need to back up a little bit because we have to deal with what I call the first cause. So let's assume for a moment that Genesis 6 is angels, and they're looking down at the daughters of men and they're lusting after them.
Yeah.
They're desiring to take them as wives and to copulate with them, to have intercourse with them.
Yeah.
So what's the first cause here? Lust.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was talking about the elaboration of that story, why the writer of Genesis didn't bother to elaborate on it, is because it was well known to the ancient Hebrews.
Yeah.
In the Book of Enoch, which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of Enoch is actually quoted verbatim in the New Testament, in the Book of Jude, verbatim.
Right. So it's considered an apocryphal book or non-canonical book. It's not included in any canon of the Bible that we're familiar with. Certainly not in the history of the church, making ecumenical council formal decrees. But it has been around,
except for in Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia, both the Beta Israel Jews, the ancient Jewish community, and the Tawahedo Orthodox Christians long ago incorporated and preserved the Book of Enoch in their canon.
And as you say, there are references, it would seem, in the New Testament. So
many.
What is? I didn't know
there are allusions. There are many allusions to the Book of Enoch. For example, when Jesus says, "In my Father's house are many mansions." Well, where's that come from? The Book of Enoch.
The Book of Enoch.
Nowhere to be found.
I've never read the Book of Enoch.
There are many allusions, but then, as I said, in Jude it's verbatim, and Jude says that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, and then copy from First Enoch, paste into his epistle. So they were conversant. The early church, the church fathers, the disciples of Christ, Christ himself, and all of the writers of the Bible, all of them were conversant with the Book of Enoch. There's no question. In fact, I believe that if you were living in first century Jerusalem, before it was destroyed by the Romans, and if you were to walk into the temple during the time of Christ, into the synagogue, I think you would find in the scriptorium, where all of the sacred scrolls are kept, you would find a manuscript that was representative of what today we call First Enoch, Ethiopic Enoch.
I would even say,
very interesting stuff. Now that to me actually makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I already gave my whole analogy from the Joe Rogan wild AI rants and etc. But that does make a lot of sense. It is in the the base of this whole Joe Rogan clip was her talking about how the Ethiopians still have it, and they're still looking at it as sacred scripture, and they're keeping it. All the other, in the West, they completely threw the book out, right? And the Ethiopians are like, no, we should probably keep this. Kind of makes sense to keep it. Now, for me, that it does make sense to keep it. And then when I looked into the whole Ethiopian thing, their Bible was considered one of the oldest and most complete. And then these were the reasons why. Had ancient Christian tradition, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its Christian roots back to the 4th century, when Christianity became the state religion of the kingdom of Aksum, Jezi, that's the language that they speak. Basically, we'll just say Ethiopian. Many Ethiopian biblical manuscripts were written in Ethiopian, an ancient language that has been preserved for centuries and then continuous use. Ethiopian canon has been in the active use for over 1,600 years without the same kind of canon reductions that happened in the West. That is, some of the reasons why it's considered the oldest, and it's considered the most complete, because it has all these books. Broader canon. Canon just means the stories. It includes Enoch, Jubilees, Maccabee, I'm not sure, that are not found in most Christian canons. Fuller Older Testament preserves Jewish and early Christian writings that were widely read in iniquity, but later excluded from Protestant and even Catholic canons. Preservation of unique texts. Some texts survived in complete form only in Ethiopian manuscripts, which is Enoch. It's very interesting stuff, man. Very interesting stuff. So that's why it's considered the oldest and most complete, right? Why remove that type of thing? Well, this is where we get into the little tinfoil Speedo parts. This is where we get deep into the tinfoil Speedo. This is just me. There's sometimes when I'm doing research, certain things just click, and I just go, oh. And it's not some well thought out thing. I literally just wrote the framework of it now, and it's not some super. I have to do another episode on it to really dig deep. But I'll do one more thing here. Let me just play this guy for you. This guy seems like an Ethiopian dude, a scholar of sorts.
Ethiopia up until the time of the conversion to Christianity. The other thing is that there's no official claim that the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest Bible. It is absurd to attach the oldest Bible to any specific church or any specific country. But there's something else that is true. The oldest illuminated Bible, the Garima Gospels, are Ethiopian. The oldest illuminated Bible is Ethiopian. The Garima Gospels are dated to the 4th century. The other thing that Wesley Huff said was that there were Syrian missionaries that went to Ethiopia in the 4th century. That is true. But they were actually refugees that were accepted and received in the Ethiopian kingdom. Ethiopia was declared a Christian empire in the 4th century, before the conversion of Rome. The mistake that Wesley Huff is making here is that the Ethiopians accepted all the scriptures that the Syrians brought and accepted them as canon, but that's not true. For example, the Apocalypse of Peter, an ancient Christian text, is not considered canon in the Ethiopian church, but it's considered sacred literature. And there are many other texts or sacred texts like that are not considered canon in the Ethiopian church. They are considered hagiographies or sacred texts. The reason that books like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, ancient Jewish sacred texts, are considered canon in the Ethiopian church is because the Ethiopian church believed that they were part of the ancient Hebrew canon prior or during the times of Jesus. Another thing that Wesley Huff omits is that the only reason that we have a full version of the Book of Enoch today, or a full version of the Book of Jubilees, ancient Jewish scripture, is because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved and canonized these texts for thousands of years. So one thing is for sure, the oldest illuminated Bible, the Garima Gospels, is Ethiopian. And the Ethiopian Church has preserved not only ancient Jewish texts, but also Jewish practices that date back to the First Temple period.
So the reason I play this, well, it's informational, but also it kind of shows that when I'm talking about community to community, right? Wes Huff is a part of this community where they're like, we know this and we know that and we know that. Just like in this community, we know to put on our tinfoil Speedo. Just like in another community, you know to buckle up and get snippy or whatever the hell some other YouTuber says. I don't know. But you know what I mean? From community to community, there's things that are just understood. So Wes Huff just has this understanding of this is actually false writings. It's like you're calling them false, but there's these ancient people who are preserving this stuff, and they're like, it's not false over here. So it's very odd. And then it also kind of speaks to, you're looking at one, I don't know about the Ethiopian society, maybe they're not as far along as us technologically. Maybe they haven't reached the point where they are putting everybody's livelihoods in jeopardy in order to usher in the greatest age of AI. Maybe they're not smart enough to do that to their own people yet. Hopefully they get there. Maybe they just haven't started with the brain chips. Poor guys. I don't know. Maybe they're not that far along. I don't know what it's like over there. But to just dismiss what they have to say and what they keep sacred and what they have kept sacred for thousands of years, it just seems there's so much hubris in that. So much arrogance in that, I think. So, I don't know. I look at that and I go, there's a reason that they're doing that, right? Even if I don't agree with it, and the fact that they did it for thousands of years, it's the same way that someone might look at me because I read the Bible. Like, oh, you're reading these stories. And then all of a sudden there's other Christian people who are looking at other Christian societies that have been around longer than they have, been studying, preserving longer than they have. And they're looking at it and going, you still believe in that silly book? It's like, what? I don't think that's the right thing to do. That's just me. Now, let's get into the craziness. I don't think it's that crazy. Here's the thing. This is what I think about the reason that this book has been I should have like a button where I press it and like a tinfoil Speedo comes down and it starts glistening just to give people a second to put them on. But this is the reason why I think the book is removed. The book serves as a warning. It serves as a very good warning. Not just a warning for, what's happened in the past, but it serves as a warning to show you where demons come from. Just like that Yo Mike's guy said, where demons come from. And it would also serve as a warning as to where they are now, which, if you heard in the video, he was saying that there would be no heaven, there would be no hell. They would be destined to walk among us unseen for eternity. Okay? If we understood that, we might look at things a little different. I'm sure some of you already understand that, but we would look at things a little different. We would understand what forces we are wrestling with as people when darkness comes our way. We would understand that a lot more, right? So for some reason, there's some people who didn't want us to understand that, okay? And there's all the reasons of like, oh, well, they said angels did this and on and on and on. But somebody wanted that off of everybody's radar, okay? Now, here's what I think is going on with this whole thing. Right away, when I started hearing about the Nephilim, I started hearing about the Book of Enoch, right away it made me think of Hollywood. It made me think of Hollywood and the way Hollywood operates. I've said it before, Hollywood operates like their own thing. You might see people who are black and white and Asian and this and that and all walks of life, all ages. You might see them and think, oh, that black guy's like me. That white person's like me. No. They're their own thing. They really are their own thing. They don't see themselves like us. They don't act like they're just like us, just one of the people. They act as though they have some kind of special ability. They act, and first off, they call themselves stars. Okay? So they are literally fallen stars, which could also translate to fallen angels. Now, this is how they operate. I'm not saying that these Hollywood people are that, but they operate like that. The same way that the fallen angels wanted to be worshipped and wanted to pretty much do whatever they wanted on earth is the exact same way that Hollywood, the people in Hollywood operate. They do the exact same thing. Now, also, these stars, Hollywood stars, they are worshipped the exact way that the Nephilim and that the fallen angels and that Lucifer wanted to be worshipped by mankind. Okay? The exact same way. We, and maybe not you and I, but people look at stars with this holy, like, wow, look at them, like they're illuminated, like they're bringing us this light kind of thing. When in reality, they're really immersed in darkness. And we see that through the court cases and the documentaries that come out and the life stories and all this stuff. We know that they're actually covered in darkness, but it's perceived. There's this almost making up. There's this make-believe that they are just these illuminated beings that are just so far off, so much more talented than us, just better than us in every single way possible. They operate like as if they're fallen angels. Now, here's the thing. There's also this part of it, okay? I said put your tinfoil Speedo on, right? It's weird how in Hollywood, these people end up going in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they end up leaving, not even leaving. It's just years later in their careers, they end up looking very dark. Someone that I follow actually, they were talking about this person. I'm not going to pull that up, but just, what's her name? Is her name Jenna Ortega? Ortega. Yeah, let's see if that's her name. Jenna Ortega. Yeah. This girl. So, I want to find her now. She's a girl that played Wednesday, right? So she looked like this at first. She was a very bubbly looking young girl, right? Right? You can see it here. She's playing Wednesday Addams. So she's a very bubbly young girl. You can see actually a picture here as well. Very bubbly looking young girl, beautiful girl. And now she looks like this. And it's very odd the way all of them end up looking a certain way. Now, she hasn't done exactly what I'm talking about, But here's another example. Madonna after surgery. After surgery. Right? She ended up, right? Madonna. She ended up looking very different than when she started. And let me be clear. She was one of the most beautiful ladies in the world when she first hit the scene back in the 80s. I mean, absolutely stunning woman. But this is what she looks like now. You know, I think there's something to that. I've talked about it before, but I think there's something to that. Now, if I just go over here, I just do this again, right? That's what Madonna looks like. Let's do another screen here. It's Madonna. Let's do little Kim. Little Kim. So little Kim, look at what she used to look like. Look what she looks like now. This is not just aging and getting big. Her face, let's just see here. Like, that's the same person, right? This is after a bunch of changing. This is 2016. So this is 06. This is 2016. Like, she just kept changing and changing. And I think this is her now, right? In 2025. This might even be from like a 2024, but like, she used to look like this, little contouring makeup and whatnot, you know, but she was like a lovely looking, you know, African-American girl, and then turned into that. I just find it weird that they go in looking very beautiful, right? Very like us. And all of a sudden, after years, they look so different, where the chin is different. The face is different. Everything's different. It's almost like, here's what I think. Okay. I was going to say, it's almost like they've allowed something into themselves that's very dark, and it not only gave them talent, but it also attached themselves in such a way that it actually started morphing their appearance. That's what it feels like. But here's what I will say. I know, right? And I've talked to a guy that does witchcraft. I know Hollywood does occult things, right? I don't know what, but I know they do occult things. Who's to say that they didn't know about the Book of Enoch? I know they do, because I've been listening to hip hop my whole life. And the only reason I know about the Book of Enoch at all is because I've heard it in so many rap songs. The only reason I know about the Nephilim is because I've heard it in so many rap songs of rappers saying that they are Nephilim. I've heard this so much throughout my entire life. Never knew what it was, never understood the Book of Enoch and all of that. I mean, even Kendrick Lamar recently in I think his newest album, or maybe the one before that, he says that he is Elohim. Like, he's referencing the Nephilim, and like, it's very odd. He's talking about being a fallen angel. It's very interesting. They're all day. So they know about this whole thing. Who's to say that who's to say that they don't know that these beings are destined to walk among us in the unseen forever? Who's to say that they don't know that, and they aren't doing rituals to call those same spirits into themselves, into their beings? So those beings, there's a trade-off, because that's how it always happens in these dark arts. You accept something into you, you are given something in return, and there's a trade-off, right? Bob Dylan even said it. He goes, you know, I signed up with the big guy, and the person's like, who are you talking about? And he's like, you know, Satan. Let me just verify that. I know it's true. Bob Dylan, devil. Fucking devil. Wow, he has a bunch of songs about the devil too. There it is. Beautiful. Let's just play this quickly so you understand what I'm talking about. Right? In some communities, I can just say this and you understand what I'm talking about. Right? In other communities, I actually have to show you what I'm talking about.
Do it. Why are you still out here?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. I mean, I made a bargain with it, you know, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And in this earth, and then in the world we can't see.
He didn't say heaven. He didn't say in the next world. He didn't say the kingdom of heaven and eternal life and all that stuff. He said in this world and in where we can't see, right? And where are the Nephilim destined to roam? in the unseen, on this plane, right? It also touches on the whole interdimensional thing as well. But who's to say that they aren't actually signing up, like he just said, right? Signing up, allowing these things in, allowing these things around them to attach to them. These things, it's a trade-off where these beings get worshipped by mankind, and then the person who actually decided to let them in, they get worshipped as well. They get fame, they get riches, they get everything in this material realm that the Dark One has promised them, and that Nephilim is also getting what it wants in regards to being worshipped, right? And then the Nephilim make sure, don't worry, I'm going to give you talent, I'm going to give you everything you need to do this, I'm going to give you songs, etc., etc. I don't know, man. That's what I think is going on with this. Let me just go through what I wrote. Yeah, they are worshipped. Stars are worshipped like Satan and the fallen ones wannabe. Plastic surgery, everything looks different, but also looks the same. If we knew where demons came from, we would see them. We would understand. When I say we'd see them, we would understand where they are. We'd understand where they were lurking. So I think there's a combination of things happening here, right? Again, tinfoil speedo on. It seems like, yeah, maybe the book was removed because of all the things that Wes Huff is saying and the other guy. Or maybe there's something more to it. Maybe there's something a lot darker to it. You know, as I do all this research into all these different topics, it's hard to deny how much darkness is afoot and currently seems like it has the upper hand in a lot of ways, at least in the material world around people who don't know it. So when I hear about this, you know, Book of Enoch and it not being given the proper exposure, and then hear about where these demons actually ended up, and then to see the world the way it is currently, to see who and what's being worshipped, and to see what who and what actually look like as time goes on, it's very hard for me to not think that something much darker than what we're aware of is actually happening. We know that these people are in the practice of some kind of dark arts. Who's to say that they're not currently working with the Nephilim and actually working with fallen angels and actually working with Lucifer? Who's to say? And maybe we would all come to this conclusion if we all had just naturally access to the Book of Enoch. I don't know. Anyways, guys, just wanted to make that whole thing, little documentary for you there.